Hey team, today we move into talking about cellular energy. And this is a big important topic that involves a lot of biochemistry. So we're going to start out very basic. We're going to be talking about different types of energy, and then we'll eventually move into cellular respiration and photosynthesis. And it can be a little overwhelming in terms of the material, but we're going to, I'm going to walk you through it, and then we're going to say, okay, we don't want to lose sight of the big picture. Okay, and so then we'll be repeatedly going back and talking about what the big picture is, okay? All right, so let's get started. And the way we want to start is by talking about different types of energy. And, there are some laws that govern energy. One of the first things you learned when you started probably in 8th grade biology class or life science class was the law of thermodynamics, right? Law of thermodynamics says, first law, energy. I'm trying a different approach here with the writing. This works pretty good. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? Yeah, that works just fine. Okay. So what does that mean? Well, it means there's a finite amount of energy on the earth. And all you can do with that energy really is convert it from one form to another. Okay. And so now I've listed some examples of different kinds of energy. And you could imagine how energy might be converted from one form to another. Light energy, heat energy. What is kinetic energy? The energy of motion, right? So think about, we use kinetic energy to generate electricity. We build a dam and let the water flow across the dam and turn turbines, and that's an example of kinetic energy. Think about a sailboat, right? It's moving. Okay, and then there's a special kind of energy, and this is the energy of living things primarily, and this is what we call chemical energy. So, in the end, this is what we're going to be really interested in. We're also going to be interested in these others, particularly light energy, because we know in photosynthesis, organisms convert light energy into chemical energy, and that's a big deal, okay? So we might start our discussion by just thinking about a lump of coal. Let's say this is a piece of coal, okay? One of the things you could think about is, coal has potential energy. Potential energy just means it's possible to use this and convert the energy that's in the coal into some other kind of energy. And we do this all the time, don't we? We burn coal for energy. So you could imagine we use coal to generate electricity to do work, right? And so you could imagine combustion, right? You can burn it. And when you burn it, what kind of energy is it being converted to? Heat energy. Why I put an E on the end there, sorry. See how the eraser works. Oh, that's going to take some getting used to, this eraser business. All these programs are different. I'm trying to decide which one I like the most. Okay, so then what do we do with the heat energy? We heat water up and we generate steam, right? And the steam under pressure is kinetic energy. And then what do we do with the kinetic energy? We use that kinetic energy, that steam, to turn these big turbines, right? And then I come into my house and I flip the light switch. Like magic, that electricity from the kinetic energy is in the line, and I convert it to light energy, and then I can see in the dark, right? So you can see there's this energy transfer that's occurring from one form to another as we go from burning coal to turning on a light switch and having light. But what about this question? How did the energy get in the coal in the first place? That might be something we would want to understand. Well, coal comes from what? Coal comes from living plants, right? And or from past living plants. So the coal that we dig up and burn is actually from the Carboniferous period. This is about 250 million years ago when the earth was very warm and wet, and it was covered with ferns and fern-like plants that were very large. And as they died and became buried in the ground and compressed, that's what coal is, right? Uh, Petroleum is decomposed, what's left of the decomposed animals, and coal is what's left of the decomposed plants. So how did the energy get in the coal? Well, originally the energy came from the sun, right? And here's a plant. And plants do photosynthesis. So the energy that is in the coal are actually the carbon to carbon bonds, right? Coal is just a big chunk of carbon. And so that trapped energy is what we use when we burn coal. Now, here's a thing to think about. Coal contains energy that came from the sun 250 million years ago. It's been trapped in the ground. All that time, its energy has been trapped. When we dig it up and we burn it and we then release that energy back into the environment that came from the sun 250 million years ago, is that going to have an effect on the environment? Of course, right? It doesn't take a genius to realize that you're releasing this energy as heat back into the environment. It's going to have an effect, and the effect is going to be that the environment is going to heat up. And that's what we believe is occurring today with climate change and particularly global warming, right? Okay. So then there's chemical energy. Chemical energy specifically is what we're talking about when we're dealing with coal. And it is the energy primarily of chemical bonds, specifically covalent bonds. And these carbon to carbon bonds that we saw, remember all the carbon to carbon bonds that we saw in the organic compounds? These have a tremendous amount of energy associated with them as chemical energy goes. And so we want to learn then a little bit about chemical energy molecules. Okay, so let's think about that. Here, here's the short list of chemical energy molecules. And by short list, I mean, well, there's not that many, right? And so we want to know a little something about these molecules. We want to understand something about how they work, where they're, how much energy they have and where that energy is. We've already talked about glucose a few times. The ones in the middle there, you've probably, you're likely not familiar with. And there's ATP, which we said was a nucleic acid. We talked a little bit about it, and I told you we're going to talk a whole bunch more about it. Okay, so, it's a little annoying that this has to be right there. Oh, let me see if I can make it disappear. No, it doesn't work. That's kind of a design flaw. It's covering up my slide, but that's okay. We'll figure it out. Oh, look, I found the colors. That's awesome. I was wondering where the colors were. Okay, I get excited about these things. What about glucose? What is glucose? C6H12O6. You might as well commit it to memory because you're going to be seeing this 100 times in here. 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens, right? We drew glucose when we did organic compounds. Glucose has a tremendous amount of energy associated with it as a chemical energy molecule. It's a highly carbon-rich molecule. And so, that's something that we want to take into consideration. It turns out that glucose has too much energy really for a cell to use on a cellular level to do the work that the cell needs to do. And so what these other molecules are really, these here are intermediary molecules. And ATP is sort of the ultimate molecule in terms of fueling the metabolism of a cell. So adenosine triphosphate is very important. You know, I'm fine with just using the abbreviations of these. If you want to commit them to your brain, okay. But, you know, for example, NADPH is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. I mean, you may want to put that in your brain. If you're into biochemistry, that's great. Otherwise, the abbreviations are fine. So what is the rule about these molecules in terms of energy? It's very simple. If you make a bond, you store energy. Okay? If you break a bond, you release energy. It's that simple, okay? Let's see how this is going to work. Let me make a little room here, and we'll stay on this one screen. Okay, so what if I show this? What if I show this? Here's NADPH. What if I show NADPH being converted to NADP plus? Now let's look at what's going on here. We have this phosphate with a hydrogen attached to it. And am I making a bond or breaking one here? What am I doing exactly? What I'm actually doing is I'm breaking this hydrogen off of the rest of the molecule. And what I'm left with is a positively charged ion here. It's got a plus. That tells you it's positively charged. It must have one more proton than electron. And because I'm breaking a bond, it says right here, break a bond, release energy. This is a release of energy. Okay. Now, what if I go from NADP plus to NADPH? Well, now I'm sticking a hydrogen on, so I'm storing energy. It's really that simple. Now, if we don't go through and do these preliminary things, I'm just going to tell you right now, it's very difficult to understand photosynthesis and cellular respiration because you're going to be seeing these types of reactions occurring kind of as sidebars in the main reactions. So just be aware, this is very important. It doesn't matter which of these molecules you're dealing with. Let's look at FADH2. What if I show FAD++, which is a double charged ion being converted to FAD, oops, that's a DH2. What am I doing? Am I sticking something on or breaking it off? Here I'm sticking something on, so I'm storing energy. And when I go this way, I'm release. Okay, it's that simple. All you have to do is ask yourself, am I making a bond or breaking one? And so we're going to see these kinds of reactions over and over. Now, ATP is interesting. In these molecules that we just saw, in these, you're either sticking on hydrogens or breaking them off. ATP is a little bit different. Let's look at ATP and talk about it. I think this is a pretty good format here for compared to what I was doing in the other videos. I'm pleased with this. I don't have to keep screenshotting, which is really nice for me. Okay, what is ATP? ATP is adenosine, ADENOSINE, with 3 phosphates. Phosphates, remember, are PO4. So ATP is adenosine triphosphate, 1, 2, 3. Okay. So if I show ATP being converted to ADP, D is for di, T is for tri. What I'm literally doing is breaking a phosphate off. And so from T to D, from triphosphate to diphosphate, this is a release of energy. And then if I go this way, this is a store of energy. And in your body right now, believe it or not, there's about 5 pounds of ATP. It's constantly being broken down into ADP to release energy to do work, and then your metabolism turns it back into ATP, doing a chemical reaction called cellular respiration. Okay, so in cellular respiration, what we do is we take the energy of glucose and we convert it to ATP. So it's important that you understand this stuff as a preliminary sort of sidebar to the overall discussion. Okay, good. Let that sink in for a second. Oh. There we go. Let's unannotate for a second. Now, one of the things that we want to understand, that we need to understand, is something about light energy, because we're going to do photosynthesis first. The reason we start with photosynthesis, it's slightly easier to understand than cellular respiration, in my opinion. I just feel like it's a little bit easier to grasp. And so that's why we're starting with it. Okay. What are we looking at here? What you're looking at is called the electromagnetic spectrum. And I'm going to write that up here. And this has to do with the wave particle of light. Okay. We are told that light has properties of a wave and a particle. Well, this is the wave property of light. And what we're measuring are the wavelengths. And so the way you measure a wavelength, light passes as waves. If you measure from peak to peak, that's one wavelength. Okay. And you can see these units of measurement here in meters. Look at this number. Gamma rays are the smallest wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum, 10 to the negative 14 meters. That is a teeny weeny number, right? And then it gets gradually bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until you get to AM radio waves, which are 10 to the 4 meters. Okay, so the one thing that annoys me a little bit about this chart is that they switch units. Here they're using meters, and here they're using nanometers. A nanometer is, just so you know, a millionth of a meter. So it's still a pretty small unit, right? Okay. And other than that, this image is really good. So now what I want you to understand about light and light energy is what we see as visible light, right in this region, is really, they're blowing that up and showing you Roy G. Biv, right? Think about the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. But that's really only a very small portion of what's there. The rest of this stuff we can't see, okay? And what I want to tell you is that there is a relationship between the wavelength and the amount of energy that particular wave has. And it turns out that the relationship is inversely proportional. What does that mean? It means the smaller the wave, the greater the energy, right? It's inversely proportional. So what that means is gamma rays have more energy than X-rays, which have more energy than ultraviolet light, which has more energy than visible light, et cetera, et cetera. AM radio waves having the least amount of energy. And so you kind of already know this, right? I mean, gamma rays, fortunately, they're emitted by the sun, but our atmosphere filters them out, and so you're not exposed to them. If you are an astronaut and you go up into space, you have to wear a spacesuit. Otherwise, the gamma rays would destroy your DNA. They have a tremendous amount of energy. And so, yeah, I don't know if y'all remember that show, The Incredible Hulk, right? It was a government experiment, and what they did was they took Bill Bixby and they put him in a lead room and they bombarded his body with gamma rays. And then after that, every time he got angry, he turned into a big green monster, right? Well, not very realistic. If you bombarded someone with gamma rays in a lead room, they would be dead. They would be a puddle on the floor. Too much energy for your body to absorb, and it would ultimately cause mutations of the DNA. Okay. What about X-rays? Are they safe? They have a lot of energy associated with them, it looks like, right? 10 to the negative 10 meters, very small waves. X-rays, you know, probably are not safe, right? I mean, they have a purpose. Like, if you're a dummy like me and you break your foot, like I did this week, you have to go get an X-ray. And so, although they're useful, they're also dangerous. There's a reason why, you know, you go in to get an X-ray, and the technician is like, "Okay, hang on, I'll be right back," and then they leave and go in the other room, right? And they're pushing the little button in the other room because they don't want to be exposed to that radiation. Okay. What about ultraviolet rays? Are they safe? You know the answer to this. What do they tell you when you go out in the sun? Don't just go out in the sun over and over and get yourself fried by the sun, because the UV and the rays can mutate the DNA. There's enough energy in it to mutate DNA. Okay, so it's not safe. And, you know, depending upon your skin tone, you know, what color your skin is, you may have more or less protection. And so, you know, there's an obvious advantage to having dark skin, the advantage being that you are less likely to develop skin cancer from the sun. It's not to say you never will, but it's just a much lower risk. Okay. So there is an advantage to having dark skin. What about being white? What is the advantage to being white? I mean, if you look at the range of skin tone from black to white, there must be some evolutionary or selective advantage to being white if there's one to being black. Where do white people live traditionally? In places where there's not a lot of sun, right? Think about where the white people live, Scandinavia, right? It might not even get light in the wintertime. It might be dark for 24 hours a day. In response to light, your body produces vitamin D, right? So when your skin is exposed to light, it produces vitamin D. And so the advantage of being white is you would get vitamin D in a low light environment where you evolved. Okay, so there are advantages to both. And then we get to visible light, right? And it turns out that if we're interested in photosynthesis and what drives photosynthesis, it is actually in the visible light range. And so plants don't really use this stuff here to photosynthesize. What drives photosynthesis is visible light, and specifically in the red and the blue wavelengths. These are the wavelengths that plants really need in order to grow. Okay. And then when we get here to infrared, really when we get about here, we call this non-ionizing radiation. And what that means is, you know, the stuff on this side is ionizing. And what it means is it has enough energy to damage DNA. We believe that from here on, we don't have enough energy to damage the DNA. It's non-ionizing radiation. We might say a word or two about cell phone frequencies, which are right about here, right? And then microwaves, which are right about here. Microwave ovens, are they safe? You know, they've been around a long time. And it is believed that the energy in a microwave is non-ionizing. It's not enough energy to damage DNA. At the very worst, it might burn you, right? They've done all sorts of studies with microwaves. I'm not here to tell you a microwave is safe or not safe. There's two ways to look at it. Is the microwave safe for you to stand in front of? And is the food safe to eat out of it? And I personally don't stand in front of a microwave while it's running. I don't see the point. You might as well get out of the way in case a little bit of that radiation is coming out. Okay. What about cell phones? We all have them, right? Pretty much everybody has one. Are they dangerous? Are they safe? Have you ever bothered to read the pamphlet that came with your cell phone that talks about cell phones and your health? Probably not. Most people just throw that paperwork away. It says, well, we've done studies and it's inconclusive. We don't know if putting this phone up to your brain for hours and hours and hours might damage your DNA. We just don't know. Okay. They have done some studies which seem to indicate that there's the potential for brain tumor formation. One of the studies they did was interesting. It was people that already had brain tumors, and they did a questionnaire about their cell phone use. And what they found was people that are the chronic one-siders, you know, they're always on the one side, tended to have the brain tumor on that side, whereas the people that switched back and forth a lot, it seemed that the tumor was kind of randomly on one side or another. Is that conclusive evidence? Not really. And then they've done other studies that have seemed to demonstrate that there's no danger. Suffice it to say, the less you can have this thing that's emitting radiation up against your ear, probably the better off you will be. Okay. By the time we get to these waves, we like to think, well, there's no danger at all, right? The room is full of AM radio waves, and they're probably not doing us any damage. Okay. So what we want to think about is photosynthesis. And what I'm going to tell you now about photosynthesis is, like I said, red and blue are what drive photosynthesis. We refer to red and blue wavelengths as being the action spectrum for photosynthesis. And what we mean by that is these are the wavelengths of light that drive the process. They cause the action of photosynthesis. Without red and blue, photosynthesis is not going to occur. Okay? You might think green because the leaf is green, but we're going to talk about pigments next, and we'll see why that's not the case. Okay. Oops. Let me go ahead and clear that. Get rid of that. Oops. Okay, let's continue on. Next, we talk about enzymes. And we've already talked a little bit about them and how they work, so we won't belabor it too much more, but this is, I like this image here, which kind of shows you in a little more detail what we're talking about. Here's the substrate molecules and the active site. You can see how they fit in the active site. And why are we talking about enzymes? Well, because all of these biochemical reactions that we're going to be talking about, photosynthesis, cellular respiration, etc., are catalyzed by enzymes. Without the enzymes, they're not going to happen. So they're an integral part of what we're going to be discussing when we do photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Substrate enzyme complex forms, and then out comes the product. And you'll notice that the enzyme remains unchanged, and so the enzyme can be used over and over and over. We did talk a little bit about inhibitors that can fit the active site and wreak havoc on the organism. Okay. All right, next slide. Starting to get the hang of this new little system I'm using, which is good. I can't advance the slide though without there we go. Okay, so next we want to talk about pigments. And by definition, a pigment is any substance that absorbs light. So let's think back to visible light, Roy G. Biv, right? The colors of the rainbow. Why does something look the color that it does? Well, let's take this yellow, for example. Roy G. Biv, all the different visible colors of light are hitting this yellow pigment, right? And the color that you see it as, oh, now I get to try my marker. The color that you see it as is the color that's being reflected. Okay. So what that means is this pigment, this yellow pigment is reflecting yellow. It's absorbing everything else. It's absorbing the blue, the green, the violet, the indigo, the red. It's reflecting the yellow. Okay, so what about this one? Well, this one is absorbing everything but blue. So it is a pigment that's absorbing everything but blue. The color that something looks is the color that's being reflected. So now if you think about a green leaf, you know, if we draw a green leaf here, Roy G. Biv is hitting the leaf, and what's being reflected is green. So it should make sense to you that green is not going to work for photosynthesis because green is being reflected away. The energy that works is the energy that's absorbed, okay? And there is a molecule called chlorophyll A, which is the primary photosynthetic pigment. And chlorophyll A is responsible for photosynthesis. Now, if you had to guess, we know that it's reflecting green. What do you think chlorophyll A absorbs primarily? What's the absorption spectrum of this molecule? If you had to guess. Think back, that's an M, sorry. Think back about what we talked about was the action spectrum for photosynthesis. It should make sense to you that chlorophyll A is going to absorb red and blue primarily. What's getting absorbed by this photosynthetic molecule is what is in fact being used to drive photosynthesis. So the absorption spectrum of chlorophyll A and the action spectrum for photosynthesis are the same. They're in the red and the blue wavelengths of light. Okay. Now let's think about black and white. Is white a pigment? What's happening when something looks white? Well, all the different colors are hitting this white area right here, and they're all being reflected away. Roy G. Biv is all being reflected back, so nothing is being absorbed. When something is white, it's reflecting all the wavelengths, and so it just looks like visible light. It's white. So white is not a pigment. Is black a pigment? There's some black here in this bar. Is black a pigment? Well, what's happening when something is black? When light hits something that's black, everything is being absorbed. Nothing is being reflected. And so nothing is being reflected back. It doesn't appear to have a color. And so it's black. And so black is in fact a pigment. It's very much a pigment because it absorbs all the light. White is not a pigment because it doesn't absorb any of the light. I've been dying to get the school to let me do an experiment with my students, but once the COVID is over, and the experiment is we're gonna go and buy. Everyone gets a brand new Corvette. We're gonna buy 15 white Corvettes and 15 black Corvettes, and then we're going to South Beach, y'all. We're going to Florida, Miami, and we're gonna drive our Corvettes there. We're gonna have a big time. When we get there, we're going to go to the beach and we're going to park the Corvettes nose to nose, black Corvette, white Corvette, black Corvette, right? And we're going to let them bake in the hot Miami sun for an hour. And then I'm going to say, okay, put your hand on the black Corvette, put your hand on the white Corvette. Is one hotter than the other? What do you think? Is one hotter than the other? Absolutely. Which one's absorbing light energy and converting it to heat energy? Black, right? That black pigment is absorbing all of that light energy. Which one is reflecting it all, or most of it? The white Corvette. So it makes sense if you live in a hot climate, don't drive a black car. And if you live in a cold climate, maybe a black car is a good choice. Okay? It's the little things that I like to think about that are interesting sometimes. Okay. So, oops, let's clear it. I'm getting the hang of this, y'all. I tell you, this is good. So now I think at this point, we're actually ready to talk about photosynthesis, if you can believe that. Because now we know something about enzymes, we know something about pigments, we know something about energy, chemical energy, light energy. We know all the little pieces to the puzzle, okay? So this is, that was all sort of like this preliminary information. So today, what I would hope to get through in this video is the light-dependent reactions, and then we'll pick up the light-independent reactions next time, okay? So what does this mean? Well, all of these reactions involve converting light energy to chemical energy, okay? And this, not all of the reactions, but this particular reaction, we're going to convert light energy into chemical energy. And that's why we call it the light-dependent reactions. Without light, it's not going to happen. And so this particular set of reactions used to be called the light reactions, and now we call it the light-dependent reactions. This is half of photosynthesis, okay? Well, there's a couple of things we want to remember. I'm going to get the annotator up here now, okay? One of the things we really want to remember is, what is the general chemical equation for photosynthesis? Well, we're going to balance it. We're going to say photosynthesis involves 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters being converted to C6H12O6, which is glucose, plus oxygen is liberated in the process. We want to keep coming back. This is a 6 right here. We want to keep coming back to this general chemical equation. This, in my opinion, is the big picture. You don't want to take the next test without knowing this big picture here, okay? This is important. So light energy, it says, in the light-dependent reactions is being converted to chemical energy. Well, you could imagine the light energy is in the form of the sun. The chemical energy you might think is glucose, but we're not quite there yet. The chemical energy, it turns out, is in the form of these 2 molecules, ATP, we're going to make some ATP, and we're going to make some NADPH. So we're storing energy in these chemical energy molecules. This is very important, okay? And you can see it says it here. One of the things I like to draw out is like this. I'm going to say energy of chemical, energy of light is being converted to energy of chemical, and then knowing the sun is the light energy source, and ATP and NADPH are the chemical energy sources. So let's see how it works. I'm going to get a blank screen now. I wonder if I can do that here. It doesn't look like it. Okay, so that's no worries. I'm gonna get rid of this. I'm gonna go to my whiteboard now. I think I am anyway. Let's see. For some reason it won't let me out with my PowerPoint. Oh, there we go. Okay, I don't know why that happened, but no worries. Here we are, the light-dependent reactions, and you can see here's a one that I stole from a textbook showing this process. But we're going to draw our own. I think it's really very helpful for us to draw our own version of it. Okay, so here's what it's going to look like. Here we go. We're going to have these 2 circles like this, okay? And we're going to talk about what all this stuff is. And then we're going to have these arrows, and you can see there's an arrow going up and coming back down. And then it goes back up again, and then it comes back down again. Okay, so we have all this going on. And I'm going to tell you what all this stuff is, okay? These are called photosystems. And it's a little confusing. Photosystem, you would think this would be the 1 and 2, but actually it's 2 and 1. And the reason is because this one was discovered first. That's the only reason this is photosystem 1. And then they later found this. When they first were figuring it out, they thought that this was photosynthesis. That was all there was. And then later they're like, whoa, there's this whole other part. Okay. What is a photosystem? It is embedded in the chloroplast in a cell, photosynthetic cell. And it is a discrete photosynthetic unit. A photosystem is the level at which photosynthesis is actually occurring. Okay, so what's going on here? Well, it consists of this little spot here is called the reaction center. And you could guess what that is, chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is really the only molecule that can do photosynthesis. The rest of the photosystem consists of what we call accessory pigments. Oops. And it's worth mentioning what those are. Okay, so we have the following. We have chlorophyll B. I don't know why it's in red, sorry. Chlorophyll A, we already talked about. Chlorophyll B. Here, let me do it. Let me color code it for you. How about that? Turns out chlorophyll A is very much of a kind of blue-green color. Don't really have a good color for it here, but let's say chlorophyll A is considered the primary photosynthetic pigment. I realize that's more blue than green. Chlorophyll B is a very olive drab. And then we have red pigments, which are called yellow pigments, yellow to red, really, which are called xanthophylls. And then the last one is orange. I guess I kind of screwed up. Sorry. Darn it. See, I tried to get clever here. Let's redo. That's a redo. Let me actually use yellow for xanthophylls, so it makes sense. Or yellow. And then carotenoids, carrot, are orange. Carotenoids. These are classes of pigments. There are lots of different kinds of pigments, but these are the general colors of them, okay? So what do the accessory pigments do? They live down here in the photosystem and they absorb light of slightly different wavelengths and pass that energy on to the reaction center. That's pretty much all they can do, okay? So that's the story here. And for our purposes, we're gonna say this is the same. Photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. There are some subtle differences, but basically there's a reaction center and accessory pigments in photosystem 1 as well. The arrows represent a concentration, an energy gradient. When you see an arrow going up, the energy level is going up. And then you can see there's this stair step back down, photosystem 1, and then back up again, and then back down again. Okay. And so what we have is this following situation where the way that this whole thing starts actually is with sunlight. Here's the sun. Sunlight hitting this reaction center. And what we like to say is a pair of electrons become excited. Now, here's the thing about electrons. They're the energy part of a molecule, right? And we know that the electrons are whizzing around. And one of the things you can do if you excite electrons, what really happens is they go further away from the nucleus. And remember, there's positive charges in the nucleus and the electrons are negative. And so the implications of that are that it's kind of like stretching a rubber band. The more you stretch it, the more energy it has. So the further away from the nucleus those negative charges are, the more energy they have. Well, what happens here is kind of crazy because a pair of electrons get so excited on this chlorophyll A molecule at the reaction center that they physically leave the molecule. And they leave with a chaperone, and the chaperone is a hydrogen atom. So what I'm showing you here is a hydrogen with 2 electrons has been bumped off of the chlorophyll A, and it's going up to a higher energy level like this. Okay. Now it should make sense to you. Hydrogen has 1 proton, and I'm showing with 2 electrons. So I'm going to indicate it as having a negative charge because it does. Okay. I'm not going to carry that negative charge all the way through, but just be aware there's a negative charge. And then what this is called an electron transport chain. We're going to see this again in cellular respiration. And so at each step, there's a different electron acceptor molecule. And so then these electrons get passed down the stairs to a lower energy level. And here they go. And then they end up at photosystem 1. Light hits photosystem 1 and they get excited again, so they go back up, same pair of electrons with its hydrogen, back down the stairs again. Now I'm going to remind you again of the negative charge here, because waiting at the bottom of the stairs for that hydrogen with those electrons is this thing, NADP+. Now you tell me what's going to happen when this negatively charged thing bumps into this positively charged thing. You can sure as heck bet they're going to come together to form NADPH. And now, are we storing energy or releasing it? We are storing energy, right? We're forming a chemical bond between the hydrogen and this ion. And guess what? We just stored chemical energy in the form of NADPH. We did exactly what we said we were going to do. We converted light energy to chemical energy. Okay. Now, a couple of other things. What about from here to here? Where's this energy going? You can't create or destroy energy. Well, it turns out that we can do this right here. ADP gets converted to ATP, so we store some more chemical energy. For every pair of electrons that starts out here, goes through the entire process, you get 1 ATP and 1 NADPH. And we're turning light energy into chemical energy. Now, here's the thing. You could look at this picture and think of it like a freeze frame, like there's each, we're just following 1 pair of electrons with its hydrogen, and we're showing it moving each step 1 step further. But the reality of it is it's really more like it's drawn, where on any level that you see, there could be a different pair of electrons. It's like an assembly line and a conveyor belt. And every time everything shifts over 1, you get another ATP and another NADPH. Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. So imagine it like that. Now, the last part of the picture is, which should make sense to you, if that's true, what I just said, then, chlorophyll A is going to run out of electrons. It doesn't have an endless number of electrons to donate to the system. And so what that means is we need an electron donor. We need a molecule that can donate electrons to the system. And the perfect electron donor ends up being water. Okay. And there's a process when light energy hits the water molecule. There's a process called photolysis. Photolysis is to split, lysis is to split photo with light. And so here's what happens to the water molecule when the light hits it. You get one of the hydrogens takes 2 electrons and comes over here. And what are we left with? Well, there's one of the hydrogens. The other hydrogen is positively charged. It lost its electron. And then you have an O, you have an oxygen. I can't just write O. In chemistry, O doesn't exist, and so I'm going to write the word oxygen out. Okay. And then every 2 water molecules that get split, you get an O2, you get an elemental oxygen. Sometimes you'll see people put half of an O there. So what does water do in photosynthesis, and why is it so important? It's the electron donor, which donates electrons to this system so that it can continue to run. If the water is not there, this system shuts down and the plant cannot grow. Can't generate chemical energy from light without water. So very quickly, if we go back unbalanced, CO2 plus H2O gives you C6H12O6 plus O2. Hopefully my picture's not covering that up. I can't see my picture on the screen. Well, guess what? This oxygen in the water ends up being liberated over here as elemental oxygen. The oxygen that's liberated in photosynthesis comes from the water, not the carbon dioxide. Very important to understand. And we're going to stop there. We're just out of time. We're at about 53 minutes. Great job. I'm happy to be here with y'all. Take a second maybe when you get to looking at the PowerPoint to look at this drawing here. It shows basically what I just drew, but I kind of like my drawing better, honestly. And I will see y'all next time. I hope you're having a wonderful time learning all this stuff. Take care. Bye-bye.